Hello, everyone, and thank you for being here. My name is Lucy Letterhendler, and I am the brand new curator of the AGSM. I'd like to invite you to settle in, get comfortable, and enjoy this video tour of a Prairie vernacular. This one focusing on the theme of the everyday, with videography by Javin Hardinge and narration by Chris Cooper. If you hang around after the video, I'll be focusing in a little more on three artworks from this room and giving it a little art historical perspective. If you have any questions or comments at any time, feel free to type them into the comments on Facebook or Periscope or however you're watching, and we'll have a few minutes to chat at the end. So for now, please enjoy this video from a Prairie vernacular.
Ordinary, informal, everyday settings are important to many Prairie artists, as well as creating meaning that is shared amongst a community. This is the very definition of vernacular. These Prairie artists often create work about daily life, and for many, that was a rural one. Intimate portraits of the annual round of country events, such as Frank Cicansky's grain wagon, are plentiful. Victor Cicansky's father, Frank, and Joe Fafard's mother, Julienne, were both vernacular artists. They predisposed Cicansky and Fafard to a vernacular aesthetic and an earnest drive to make objects and images. There are a number of examples of family connections in the exhibition. Victor Cicansky's practice has consistently been connected to Prairie Earth, referencing gardens and pantries of his Romanian immigrant family and childhood neighborhood of Garlic Flats in East Regina. Farm animals are an everyday subject as well. Joe Fafard's Pieta and his earthenware bowl celebrate their agricultural subjects, elevating and honoring their Prairie identity. In Layla Armstrong's Coyote Factory and Hawk on a Farmhouse, we see that she has reversed the relative sizes of animals and landscapes, suggesting the overlooked significance of these wild but increasingly human-acclimated creatures within the now people-dominated prairie. Throughout the exhibition, we discover other aspects of daily life, ordinary people engaged in work and leisure, gardening, food preparation, community activities like games, sports, and dances, activities on farms and ranches, businesses, churches, and main streets in villages and towns. Thauberger has paid tribute to vernacular artists in his work Prairie Sentinel, Winter Sentinel. The lightbox reveals a grain elevator that transitions from day to night and summer to winter, and is a direct homage to William McCargar. McCargar repeatedly painted this subject matter with the same perspective in different times of day and in different seasons. Thauberger's strategy of utilizing low art or craft media is adopted from California funk as much as it is from vernacular art. For example, his use of glitter in the work Powerline. McCargar also shared a use of glitter in his work. Thauberger's Powerline depicts unpopulated streetscapes, often found in everyday rural life, but his use of glitter and an often candy-colored palette personalizes each building. They are deserted but less somber than some of the other prairie street scenes found in the exhibition. Thauberger discovered vernacular art when he returned to Saskatchewan and worked for the Saskatchewan Arts Board. He recalls coming across a painting by William McCargar titled Sun's Glorious Set. According to Thauberger, at first he thought it was the ugliest painting he had ever seen. But the painting stayed in his mind for days afterwards, capturing his curiosity, so he hung it over his desktop to live with it and unravel its intrigue. Thauberger helped to bring attention from curators to the work of McCargar, Harvey McInnes, and others. In the mid-1970s, the Regina artists began experimenting with screen printing through the Grand Western Canadian Screen Shop in Winnipeg. Founded by artist Bill Lobchuk, the screen shop opened its doors in 1968, the first printmaking shop of its kind in Western Canada. Lobchuk was born in Neepawa, Manitoba, and studied at the University of Manitoba in Winnipeg. He has always played an active role in advocacy for the arts. Leonard Anthony became a partner at the Grand Western Canadian Screen Shop in 1973. He worked collaboratively with numerous printmakers in Winnipeg for years. In 1974, he introduced silkscreen printing to the Inuit artists of Baker Lake, Nunavut. His last 15 years of life were spent in Elma, Manitoba, which he described as paradise, enjoying the trees, river, animals, and especially the birds which figure prominently in his work. The printmaking shop staff throughout the years included many of Winnipeg's up-and-coming artists like Don Proch, Tony Tascona, and Chris Finn. Fafard, Thauberger, Cicansky, and Eurysity were among many prominent Canadian artists that produced work at the screen shop. It allowed for an artistic exchange between these Regina and Winnipeg artists in the creation of works that reflected a shared Prairie sensibility. Learn more about the other themes in the exhibition and the rest of the AGSM Art Connects video series, which brings you up close and personal to works of art as you meet artists from the prairies.
So with that, we here at the AGSM thought that it would be fun because I'm in the same position as you, the audience, having just arrived last weekend from the COVID red zone of Tiohtià:ke, Montreal, to this new residence on Treaty 2 territory. So I'm in self-quarantine and I'm forced to enjoy this exhibit remotely, just like you all. We thought it'd be fun for me to follow behind the weekly virtual tours of a Prairie Vernacular, like the one that you just saw, and talk a little bit from my curatorial perspective. Since we can't wander around the gallery together, we'll wander around a few images here, and I'll talk about a few things that I was struck by in this grouping of the everyday. I hope that you find it interesting too, and again, please feel free to participate in the comments, and we'll touch on those at the end of the show. So if we could share the first image. Here we go. I wanted to start with a question, and that's what's the big deal artistically about the everyday? Because it seems a little bit like a contradiction, doesn't it, for something that's by definition mundane to be interesting. But what's important in answering that question is to remember that culture is not static. It changes all the time. In mainstream Western art history, a big moment occurred in 1850 when the painter Gustave Courbet put several pieces in a state-sponsored art show in Paris called the Salon, among them this piece, Burial at Ornans. This is widely considered to be the birthplace of European realism, these depictions of the everyday. And this piece in particular received an intensely mixed response. People either loved it or they hated it with a passion. And they would get so riled up that some of the criticisms are actually very funny, such as this one by Courtois that says, I can't say if it would be worse to be buried in Ornans or to be born there with all of those ugly people. And this is Courbet's hometowns that they're insulting. What's offensive to them is that this average scene is taking up hallowed space, the surface of an oil painting. But it wasn't just his paintings that offended them. At this time, both his appearance and his manners alienated a good half of the capital A art world. because they felt like he just didn't belong with them. So now, with the benefit of hindsight that we have, we can see how the everyday in art has a really direct link to vernacular art. These artists who maintain a unique voice in the face of exclusion. There were female contemporaries of Courbet as well who had little choice but to paint the everyday because their mobility was so restricted. They weren't allowed to go anywhere, such as this domestic scene by Berthe Morisot. This is something we see in folk and vernacular art as well, how the everyday might emerge from restricted movement. Here's a piece by Raz Dizzy, who's a major figure in a group of artists called the Jamaican Intuitives. Similar to how French realism followed directly from a political turn towards socialism, Jamaican Intuitives followed Jamaican independence, which was 1962. And what I want to draw your attention to with this work is the title of it, because visually, it could be totally abstract. It could be a part of a number of different art movements, but when it's given this complex caption, it transforms into a snapshot of an encounter with a woman. And this woman is having a perfectly average day. This image is here to transition into a conversation about the titles of three pieces in a Prairie Vernaculars group, The Everyday. Starting with this one, here we have a painting that's a commonplace scene. It's not commonplace to me yet. I still yell cow every time I see a cow, but I assume it soon will be. And this is by Joe Fafard. He titled this Pietà. And what he's done with that title is asserted his place in the art world, and he's also insisting that these cows have a space in the spiritual world. For those of you who don't know, Pietà is a really specific subject in art. The most famous is a sculpture by Michelangelo at St. Peter's Basilica in Rome. The subject matter is the Virgin Mary holding the corpse of her son, Jesus. They're often the same age. She's actually quite often younger than her son in these depictions. And Mary is always calm and composed, at peace and sad. Pietà translates to pity. So what Fafard has done with this title is not only figuratively hung his painting in the same room as Michelangelo, but he's also attributed genuine maternal love to this cow and a really profound individuality. There's an NFB documentary about Fafard from 1973, which I'll post in the Facebook group later. And he says that cows and horses never had a sex to him, maybe because he grew up entirely in French, but he always thought that horse was father and cow was mother. On the other end of the spectrum, here's a work that does the opposite of what Fafard's does. Rather than using a title to elevate this image to a higher plane, George Tosack titled this piece, Canada, 1949, parentheses, racism in Alberta during the 40s. So he's using a title here to state in no uncertain terms that this painting is about something really concrete. I'd like to show you a few details of this piece as well. Even the wordiness of the title is like a trip out of the realm of allegory and into the realm of the documentary, where he begins Canada and then narrows it down to Alberta, and what about Alberta and when is it going on? So there's something in this work that's almost a testimony. I'm going to wrap up with this piece by Victor Cecansky, for one, because I think it's just a real fun piece, and I think it really embodies what we mean by the everyday. It immediately reminded me of this photo that I took in 2015 at a thrift store in Billings, Montana. I took this photo because there was something so intentional and specific with the way that someone had put all of these spice containers on display. And what's more, someone had to collect them beforehand and decide that they had some value. And in the collecting and the displaying of these pieces, there's a kind of anonymous artist at work here. So this title, Prairie Blue with October Pickles, does two different things. It's inverting the mundane and the high art with it. So when he says just pickles, there's a kind of magic trick, a kind of a trick of the hand that make these intricate sculptural objects that are the substance and the detail of the work into simply pickled pantry food. And then meanwhile, the selection of the blue color, which would be for many of us just the color that our cupboards are, that color selection becomes the act of high art. And it's also spiritualizing the landscape in a significant way. This landscape that you see on top, it gives the landscape agency. With the title, he's making you notice that the sky of the prairies is a special blue because the ground of the prairies is a special ochre. So that landscape is both an artwork and an artist all on its own. So that's a quick walk around the everyday room with me. If there are any questions, again, I'll be happy to answer them now, or if anything occurs to you later, please feel free to post on social media and I'll reply. Or you can send me an email at this address until I get myself into the office. That's the best way to contact me. So I will check if there are any questions. Okay, so I can't wait I don't see any questions here. I can't wait to be in the gallery, and everybody be sure to check in next week for a virtual tour of the Humor and Playfulness Room. This talk was a pretty classic art history structure, but I think that humor and play is a really good place to branch off and start new kinds of conversations. I can't wait to have them with you. So thank you very much and goodbye. We will see you next week.